Well, good morning to you all.
Same to you.
I see that you're all still smiling this morning. That's good. Day 3, still awake. We'll try not to change that here. I'm actually very excited. I made up a word this morning, and I have a very specific use of this word that I want to use, and I'm going to be a little upset if the word already exists. All right, we'll get to that in just a minute here. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Wow, we have 1 hour to do like half of what I was going to do. So we talked about content, and yesterday we talked about natural law and the importance of natural law today in our various discussions. Natural law is a description, among other things, of design and purpose. And I want to pick up on that today as we talk about the student. Natural law is a description of design and purpose. We also did a little excursus on literature, somewhat shortened, and if we have time, we'll return to that briefly. But what goes with literature, especially in Luther's conversations on schooling, is the subject of history. I sometimes wonder if the line between history and literature maybe is not as hard and fast as we sometimes think it is. And so just a little bit there, but a very important subject in a Lutheran school. I think the study of history is probably one of the unique aspects of Lutheran education. Actually the father of modern history, Matthias Flacius, was a Lutheran, and an extremely important one. And if you haven't read his biography by, is it Olson? What's his?
Oliver Olson.
Oliver, thank you. Magnificent. Great read. We know a lot about the Reformation, and we know a little bit about the context of the writing of the Formula of Concord, but there was a time frame in between that we generally know very little about during the late 1540s, 1550s, and Matthias Flacius is just a huge character there, but he's a very complex, incredible person. Languages, classical education, anyway, great story, great read. So today we're going to turn to the student, and a reminder here that natural law can provide us only partial access to the question of what is man. Natural law can only tell us part of the answer, and that's very important for a Lutheran school. What are we going to say about our student? The ancient Roman pedagogue Quintilian said that the goal of education is the good man skilled in speaking. You're probably familiar with Johann Sturm's goal of a wise and eloquent piety. Luther described a man or a woman who was skilled in hearing and speaking, since, of course, he was particularly concerned with Christians who hear and read God's Word, and who was prepared to love and serve his neighbor in church and home and community. And I propose that our goal is simply to raise up Christian men and women, ready in mind and will and emotions to take up the manly and womanly vocations in the home, the church, the school, the city, the economic sphere. So I wanted to set before you the whole idea of goal and purpose, our identity given to us by our Creator. We have to ask the question, what is your student? Who is he? What kind of material are you working with? To quote Psalm 8, as I did yesterday, what is man that you are mindful of him? The question we ask of God. It's an important question because the answer will determine what you teach and how you teach it. Progressive education brings certain assumptions to education and leads to a certain kind of pedagogy. The same is true of every other belief about man, Christian or non-Christian, Lutheran or non-Lutheran. And this is going to be just sort of a quick overview to help you think about this. So what is man? Is he, and by man I mean for you in this context, the child in your classroom or your home school, Is man a highly evolved species of animal that happens to have evolved to the top of the food chain, or to the highest point of the power chain, or to the pinnacle of the pleasure accomplishments? Is that the goal of man's existence? Is that what he has evolved for? Is that who he is? And that in many ways, of course, describes government education today. Of course, consequently, if that's the case, all societal, religious, and communal institutions are mere products of this evolutionary process, constructs that may be deconstructed by the will, which, of course, is set against God's Word, as we see. This is how government education produces cohabitation, the sodomite mockery of holy matrimony, opposition to the intolerance which characterizes truth, and hostility simply to Christianity itself. We might then ask in this context, is morality itself, ethics, right and wrong, merely a matter of social conventions? And of course you have here the collaboration of Darwin and modern linguistic theories, and a lot of the things that Mrs. Heine is telling us about in the afternoon. Or should we think of man, again, that child, as being basically good? So, Rousseau, Romanticism, and the like. Is the process of education to be thought of as a process of drawing upon and drawing out the goodness, the instinctive wisdom of native man? And also another basic pedagogical assumption of progressive education. Or is man an autonomous being, having neither authority over him, to whom he must answer, nor an essential community around him to which he is morally bound? There you have radical individualism. Or alternately, is man primarily one member of his contemporary community, the product of the culture of his day? Or again, is man merely a consumer, to be educated to work without thinking, to consume without self-reflection or self-control, to be controlled by others, without the power of language to defend himself? Is he just simply an animal whose existence is defined by his desires? And again, here in many ways is the goal of modernism, industrialization, a consumption-based economy. As you see, your map, your worldview assumptions, your theology, what you believe about man himself, all employed to determine the goals of education in the form of pedagogy that you shall use. So again, we ask the question, what is man? We have already reflected upon man as, you've got to use the Latin terms here, homo audiens, the man who hearing man, or homo loquens, speaking man, created by God for speech, and for speech particularly here for communion with God himself. Communion, of course, as we know, taking place only in his word. In consequence, we can also think of man as homo sapiens, knowing or reasoning man, because that belongs to the capacity of language. The trivium of grammar, logic, and rhetoric fit hand in glove with the grammatical, rational, verbal nature of man. The Athanasian Creed, by the way, takes up this old definition as it describes Christ's manhood as composed of a rational soul and human flesh. I love it when our creed gives us a great definition, not only of who God is, but who man is. Right? Man is a creature. He is an animal that has language or reason. That's the old Greek definition, zoon, ekon, logon, right? The creature having reason. But this is not an adequate biblical definition. Luther reminds us that to have a true knowledge of man, we must include man's history and man's relationship to God. An article written by Roland Ziegler in the CTQ last year, 2014, he talks about that. Man can never be abstracted from God. Man is always in relation to God. You know what? This is actually a very difficult concept for us because we are not trained for this. We cannot know what humanity is without his relationship to God. You just have to understand that. Man is not this isolated entity out here, and oh yeah, there's God also, and now we need to kind of talk about the two of them. No, man is who he is in relation to God. That's a basic understanding of our humanity, and will help you to understand our task a little better. All right, this, of course, then includes not only the fact of his creation. He is created by God for God's own purposes and ends, but that also man is a sinner. His sin against God and God's action in sending his Son in human flesh to redeem man from sin now has become a part of our identity as man. I love the great Ascension hymn that speaks of our human nature sitting at the right hand of God. A great reminder to us. But we think first of all of sin itself. Sinful man is turned in on himself. Luther's great biblical insight. He is incurvatus in se ipsa, man turned in upon himself, and he can have no true fear, love, or trust in God apart from the working of the Holy Spirit in the Word and the sacraments. Original sin, man's profound corruption and guilt, that there is no part of man, body or soul, which is not completely poisoned by this disease. This is a basic, fundamental understanding of man, and it is a great guidance as to not only how you manage your classroom, but concerning what you teach him. Man can only be understood in the light of this history. Every education that does not take into account the basic sinfulness of man is a lie. Reason here can only provide us a partial insight into this truth, but it can provide us some insight. We need to see the despairing hunger of Alexander the Great, that he had no more lands to conquer. We need to understand the insatiable malice of Iago, the personal self-contradiction of Oedipus the king. The evil in man is real. This knowledge of the evil that clings to man's nature is the reason that our nation's forefathers established a government with checks and balances, a constitution written not for angels, but for man, sinful man. Nevertheless, every education that does not reveal the gospel, that God was in Christ reconciling the world to himself, is an education that leads away from Christ's holy church. And here's the thing that you must know about the baptized child of God in your classroom. He is now Christian man by virtue of his baptism, a child and heir of the great King of Kings. He is nobility. And he, by his baptism, by virtue of his baptism, must have a nobleman's education. Christian man is man who has his existence and being outside of himself in the God who justifies. He has the alien righteousness of Christ, a righteousness outside of himself, but which is truly his own by God's gracious imputation. He is the justified sinner in Christ. His justification comes about not because of something that came to him, that he himself did, or that was within himself, or that was even poured into him, as the Roman Catholics teach it, but it comes from outside of himself, that is, by the gospel preached and the gospel sacraments. That child, Christian child in your classroom, is both righteous and a sinner. Simul justus et peccator, more Latin for you. He is completely sinner. I tested this once in my Bible class as we were going through the catechism. So your body is sinful, right? Everybody agrees with that. Yeah, body's sinful. What about your mind? Yeah. What about your soul? motionless silence. Yes, your soul, utterly and thoroughly and completely sinful, set against God. You might very well say that original sin resides primarily in the soul, not the other way around. The child in your classroom is completely sinner, and he is completely righteous with Christ's righteousness. Your pedagogy must take this insight of Luther into account. The law must still be used to curb his wicked impulses and desires, and to condemn and crush him in his sin, and to instruct him in Christian living. He needs the gospel daily, wherein he receives the Holy Spirit, faith, the forgiveness of his sins, the power to please God with good works, by which gospel he also begins to delight in the law of God, which now instructs him in the godly life. I have begun to think that sometimes we fail to take into account that the law of God, taken in a much broader sense, is simply a description of what it means to be human. And our children need the law of God. There's no room for antinomianism here, by the way. All right. Questions or comments here, just briefly? Any?
I have a question.
Yes.
Do you have words of comfort or wisdom for us about the unbaptized children coming from non-Christian homes?
Yeah, that's hard. We have them. Yeah. I would suggest to you that you not back off at all about talking about baptism, and that you, of course, make very clear to them the comfort of the spoken word of the gospel, that Christ died for them. We're caught in that same conundrum, and I had a male nurse who worked in Denver for a while. In fact, he worked at at some sort of, it's like an orphanage run by an Eastern Orthodox, and there was an Eastern Orthodox priest that was that was in charge of that. And the priest told him that any child that was brought into them that he worked with, it was something of a medical facility. If the child wasn't baptized, he would baptize it. I just laughed. I said, we don't do that, right? But, no, not even that. We don't defy the fourth commandment about honoring parents. But it made me stop and think about the fact that our community, our congregations and schools are baptized communities. And there is a painful contradiction when we have these children who are not. I urge them, encourage them. They too were bought by the blood of Christ. I don't have better advice for you. Yeah. I think it should be hard. I don't think there's any way around that. Yeah. All right. Let me introduce some other considerations of man's nature. So we've answered the question: is man naturally good, naturally neutral, or naturally evil? Okay. So you have that answer now. Lutherans, of course, have a unique and powerful answer to that question. I want you to see here that we know the best and the worst of man. The best and the worst of man, in contrast with the world's view of humanity. The world now essentially views man as a highly evolved organism. And interestingly enough, there are debates now in the field of sociology and psychology as to how morality and religion evolved and emerged for man. So now there's a study of the evolution of man in terms of religion. It's really very fascinating what sort of fantasies they have to chase. For years already, the major scientific community has viewed institutions that we regard as divinely instituted and established as being somewhat random results of the evolution of our species. So institutions such as marriage, home and family, inheritance, community, law, government, taboos, etiquette, the rituals of our humanity. The world around us sees all of these as being simply the products of evolution. And this is what I meant yesterday when I said I think the most dangerous thing about our government schools are the assumptions that are made, not necessarily what's actually aggressively taught. This is a basic assumption that goes into the world's education. That is, that all of these institutions are simply products of evolution, which of course means that they can be dismissed as quickly as we may wish to do so. And as we see that that's actually happening. But this kind of view of man, I would say, is neither high nor low. If you want to think about in terms of a low view or a high view of man, it just shows, it just assumes man to be a mere animal, really, nothing more. Incapable of aspiring, to put it in old, ancient Greek terms, incapable of aspiring to the gods, and likewise incapable of moral evil. And so that's kind of where we are today. And I talked about with you already, more of my reflections upon the Supreme Court ruling recently, that I see that to be utterly dehumanizing, that it reduces our humanity and the essential institutions of our humanity, marriage, and the whole realm of rights, if you will, or natural law, to be just simply mere functions of desire or power. If you can get the power to get the Supreme Court or the President or the Congress or the media or whoever it is to proclaim what it is that you want believed, that's enough to make it true. So that's kind of the world we live in. We Christians think of man in far higher terms. Man is made in the image and likeness of God. And even though that image in relation to God, coram Deo, was entirely lost because of sin, we still retain something of that image in relation to the creation and our fellow man. So Genesis 9:6 gives the rationale, for example, for capital punishment. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed, for God made man in his own image. Or James 3 says the same thing in teaching us about the use of our tongue. With it we bless God and our God and Father, and with it we curse men who are made in the likeness of God. In creating us in His image, God endowed man with a high and unique identity. An identity bound up with God Himself, realized fully in the incarnation of His Son, Jesus Christ. God made man according to a specific, specially chosen design and with a high and holy purpose. For all the failures of high Renaissance humanism and every humanism, before or after, there is much truth to the greatness of man in the midst of God's creation. And furthermore, man alone in the midst of the whole creation has been taken into the Godhead and is seated upon the throne of God in heaven with Christ. In Christ with God the Father. Man, not angels, not the fallen angels, was redeemed by the incarnate image of God, the Son of the Father. Now there's true human dignity. Remember that of the child in your classroom. And man is brought to the fullness of God's purposes when he is baptized into God's name, absolved of his sin, made to be a hearer and living creation of the Word of God, fed the life-giving and divine body and blood of the incarnate Son of God. So, even fallen man, in the depths of original sin, is a far greater creature than any evolutionary theory or pagan idolatry can make him out to be. Every culture can understand the prohibition against murder according to the Golden Rule, but those with divine revelation of Scriptures know that even more murder is prohibited because the victim of murder is a severely damaged but very real image of the eternal and all-powerful God. Man is rightly set apart from the animals and requires an education that corresponds to this unique dignity. Of course, we can recognize that man is not getting better and better every day by day in every way. Nevertheless, he has always had something of greatness about him, that the great men from the ancient world up to this very day betray a brief glimpse, an understanding of what God intended man to be in the beginning of the creation. Now, all of this is to say that we can also look at the works of the ancient pagans and recognize the gifts and works of God in the knowledge and wisdom which they often portray. I've already made this argument in our discussions about natural law, but we can reiterate it here. Even in his fallen state, even in the blindness of his pagan ignorance, man is a great creature of God, endowed with a keen intellect and great powers of language. We can look with wonder upon the pyramids of Egypt, the stele with the code of Hammurabi, the porcelain griffins on the Ishtar Gate, which, by the way, I got to see in Berlin just this spring. Oh, that's incredible. The Iliad, we can consider the Iliad and the Odyssey of Homer, the wisdom of Cicero, many another pagan, and we can look upon these things with wonder. This is also to say that we can expect man to learn and do great things, to live up to at least a shadow of the design in which he was made in the beginning. We do not believe in the evolution of man. Frankly, I don't think not even his microevolution. We are, as Franzmann puts it, truly in these gray and latter days of man's dominion on the earth. Man is diminishing. He's becoming less, even in this last flash of technological brilliance before the end. But there is little of true greatness that is done anymore, and I'm not convinced we would recognize it if someone in our midst really did something truly great, something approaching the perfection of truth, goodness, and beauty. But our pedagogy should nevertheless anticipate such a possibility. And we should do our best to give our children the training and the tools that they need for just such works. I want to turn here to focus a little bit on the subject of vocation. That while making these reflections upon the greatness of man as made in the image of God, at the same time we must humbly confess that few of us will attain to anything like that greatness. But our success as teachers is not measured in those terms. More importantly, our pedagogy should be filled with this understanding, that man was created for vocation. Man was created for relationship with God, to love God with heart and mind and body and strength, but he was also created for relationship with man, to love his neighbor as himself. Created for implies purpose. I believe that this matter of purpose is critically important in a culture without God. That an understanding of it is a valuable tool in apologetics. Quick example here. I spent some time in a friendly debate with a former confirmation student of mine, one, by the way, who is always in the forefront of my mind whenever we have these conversations about classical Lutheran education. This young man has basically abandoned our church's doctrine and faith. And in particular, he had abandoned our church's condemnation of sodomy. And he, a bright young man, not unfamiliar with the various biblical arguments that I spoke with him, but he generally just dismissed them as belonging to your system of things. You're kind of locked into the system. You just don't get it. However, I stumped him completely when I stumbled upon this particular point of the question of purpose. What is the purpose of the difference between male and female? And he had never given it a thought, and so had no answer to it. Underlying that question is the matter of man's design and purpose, given by a God who created us in his image, redeemed us in his Son, sanctifies us in his Spirit. I am convinced that the younger generations, better than anybody else in our culture, understand their own lack of purpose and meaning in life. It drives much of what they do, and they oftentimes do all kinds of very outstanding or very strange or very simply wicked and evil things, trying to fill in that huge gap of what they lack in their lives. They don't have this sense of purpose or meaning in their lives. The Lutheran doctrine of vocation addresses, at least in part, the matter of purpose in a very practical way. This teaching is, I'm very thankful, is receiving a lot more attention these days. My introduction to it did not come in confirmation class or even in the years afterwards. It was when I finally read Gustav Wingren's magisterial work, Luther on Vocation. Some of you may have read that. Luther describes vocation as working with God, co-creating with God. Man becomes God's hands and feet for God's service in the world, that he is God's agent for loving the neighbor, doing God's loving works. Luther says that the young mother changing the baby's dirty diaper is the envy of the angels, who look down in wonder at this incredible privilege and joy given to that lowly woman in serving this little child who bears the same flesh and blood as their own God and Creator. Our pedagogical orientation is not toward self. Our pedagogical orientation is toward the neighbor. This is the good that our education is to accomplish in the world, the good of vocation, of marriage, and family, and service. It's not about an entrance into the top college, or good jobs, or higher socioeconomic status, and the like. All of these latter accomplishments are devoid of purpose unless they are redeemed by the doctrine of vocation, by the divinely given purposes of being a husband, wife, father, mother, a worker in service to his neighbor and the like, in order to be God's hands and feet in serving the neighbor in the world. Stop there just for a moment. Thoughts on that? This is really important. It's an orientation that we need to have. There's a collect. I don't have a hymnal with me. There's a collect in the hymnal. There's the little pages of collect, page 300, thereabout. The one for children. There's one of them for children and parents there. In particular, there's a great, just brief outline of. Bless you. Great little statement of the purposes of our work as parents. Let me see if I can quickly find it here. Grant that they may serve you well and usefully, developing their talents not for their own sakes, but to your glory and for the welfare of their neighbor. Okay. That's just great.
What page was that on?
315. There's also the one, of course, that says that we may teach them to love whatever is just and true and good. I noticed that the word beautiful is not in there. Are we to think in terms of just as a relative of beauty? All right, I'm getting off subject. Okay, yes?
That I think is so key, even with us here, that when we see you, we should see Christ in action. And I think what happens is that it becomes an academic or philosophical yes, but in reality, that's how we should view ourselves here too. Mm-hmm. Because unless we start doing that, we'll never be able to get past it's a nice idea. Mm-hmm. The reason that we're here is because we have the opportunity to serve each other, and that can be encouragement, or in your case, speaking to us. But in reality, it's Christ all in all doing it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've come to realize that the doctrine of the divine call, God's call to ministers of the gospel, pastors, is in many ways simply a special case of the doctrine of vocation. Okay. We all act in the stead and by the command of Christ in carrying out our vocations. Husbands in loving their wives, wives in loving their husbands, parents in loving their children. You stand in the stead and by the command of Christ. You have Christ's mandate to do those things. You dare not do them. You understand what I'm saying? You dare not carry out your vocation. It's like a pastor. He dare not refuse to preach the gospel or administer the sacrament. The Apostle Paul, by the way, has some very interesting reflections on that very truth. Yeah, that's an excellent point. I have to remind myself that while I may have a divine call to serve the church, I also have a divine call to be a father and a husband. One of the struggles I think that we all have as church workers is to maintain our humanity. This is the way I think of it, We're human, and part of maintaining our humanity is that we need to carry out all of our vocations, not just isolated portions of it, like serving in the church. It's really easy to become consumed by one of those and not carry out the whole thing. Of course, we live under the cross, and so you recognize the difficulties of those. All right. Let's go on. Let me talk here with you a little bit about the mind, the will, the emotions, and the appetites. The mind, the will, the emotions, and the appetites. What is man? This is a little bit more thought from the theologians of the church. Man's substance is body and soul. His soul includes the faculties of his mind, reason, and will. Man's highest faculty is his reason, the mind. The realm of language, no surprise there, right? Where grammar, logic, and rhetoric are principally seated. Man's reason must be guided and instructed principally by God's Word, or it will inevitably turn to evil and destruction in the end. Again, reflections upon natural law. Natural law is the Word of God in the creation itself, by which the creation was made and which is written and present in the very nature of things. It is the divine law. Okay, just reminder there. Okay, natural law is accessible. Only natural law is accessible to fallen reason. That's why we give attention to that among even the pagans. So, man's reason and natural law are servants, however, to God's Word in this instructions. So, man's mind, first of all. Man's will, his intentions, his purposes, which he has for himself and his life. Man's will is to be under the rule of his reason, and to be guided by it. Okay? The reason, the will, man's emotions are to be ruled by his mind and will. Now, I say that not to belittle emotions. In The Abolition of Man, C.S. Lewis reminds us that men without a heart are inhuman and inhumane, and that the belly, the appetites, must be ruled by the head through the chest. That's the way he describes the will and the emotions there. So the appetites, the belly, must be ruled by the head through the chest. The head is man's reason, his mind. The appetites, the belly, include physical hunger and thirst, sexual desire, and the like. The chest, by which C.S. Lewis means the will and emotions of man, are an integral part of man and deserve attention from parents and teachers, just as does the head. The head must rule the belly through the chest. Here in brief is what it means to educate the whole man. Our pedagogy must reach the mind and the will and the emotions, and these must govern the unruly appetites of our lower and animal nature. So, maybe by way of summary on this little part here, summarize our anthropological interests, we say that we should measure our pedagogy not only by our knowledge of God, but also by our knowledge of man. So we seek not the abolition of man. Again, if you have not read that great work by C.S. Lewis, it's a must-read. You have to read it. It's just the way it is. It's his great treatise on education. So we don't want the abolition of man as such, but rather the humanization of man. And I know that sounds strange, but our task is to make these little children human, to humanize them. Okay? They don't know what it means to be human, except by the instinctive sort of natural law that's written into them. It's our task to help shape and sharpen that and bring it to focus. What is humanity at its best in this fallen world? And your pedagogy will be shaped and guided by the answer to that question. All right, a related matter here that I want to turn to. I've got some nice Latin words here. I'm getting to that word that I made up today. All right. So, we started out the whole presentation with the question of a person's map, his world view, or world views, as it seems to be today for many people. What is man's mindset? What are his deep-seated and core beliefs? How does the child in your classroom look at the world? What are his habits, customs, etiquette, rituals, values? What does he love and admire regarding style, content of music, performing arts, visual arts, movie, other media? There are some very earthy, vocational questions. Will the children under our care marry? When? And to whom? Will they have children, and how many? How will they raise their children? Will they be civilized, ready for communal life, ready for a full adult human life? In short, what will their culture be? I'm going to work with some English to Latin to English, English to Latin words here for just a brief bit. The English word culture, some of you know, comes from the Latin verb collo, colere, collui, cultum that I've written on the board there. It means to cultivate, to till the ground, to tend, or more broadly, to dwell in or inhabit a place. You know, we're not hunter-gatherers. When you turn to agriculture, you stay in one place, right? So it means to inhabit a place. And by extension, further beyond that, it means to take care of, to honor, to worship. The worship aspect of it you can see in the fourth principal part there, the cultum, the word cult. The basic concept, of course, is an agricultural one. Culture has to do with cultivation, tilling the ground, tending crops, even livestock. To do these things, of course, is to take full possession of and benefit from a place, that is, to inhabit that place. Our task in passing on a culture to our children is to cultivate them, to till the ground of their minds and hearts and bodies, to tend them like a vine dresser tends the vines in his vineyard, and at the end to enable them to inhabit the place, the realm of God's language, God's values, God's rituals and customs. Another word for this process is the verb civilize, which comes from civis, of course, which means a citizen, or civitas, civitatis, the city or state, is to civilize our children. I think of the terms that I have used here, the term culture is probably the worst of my choices, but there's a reason why I'm sticking with it here. But I want you to think of our task in terms of these other words. We are to make citizens of our children. We are to civilize them, make them competent for life in the city of this world, and of course, even more importantly, in the city of the church. You can also think in terms of preparing them for the city or the community of their homes. And by the way, I've often reflected upon this. We live in a culture that wants to domesticate our boys. Am I right? Yeah. We don't want to domesticate boys. We want to civilize them. Okay? If you ever need an explanation for that, we want to civilize our boys. We want them to have good manners and that kind of refinement. We do not want to domesticate them. That's what you do to dogs and cats and that sort of thing, okay? Or if you want to put it in a much higher sense, the realm of a man is generally outside of the home as he faces the world and so forth. Some interesting things to think on here. And actually, I'm going to suggest, here's my new word. I think that we should think of, beyond just cultivating our children or civilizing them, I think we should maritalize them. Is that a word? Does anybody know? I didn't look it up on my iPad here, but we should prepare them for marriage.
That's very very interesting. Japan right now is facing where men will not marry, and they're not being homosexual either. They just simply have no regard for the relationship of marriage with the responsibility of caring for the wife and thus having children.
This is becoming, I think, a worldwide
Yeah.
phenomenon. Yeah, Japan is at the forefront. Italy is too.
Yeah.
Where you've got all these, there's a name for it, I forgot, but all these men that go home and live with their parents,
Yeah.
you know. Yes.
How about, I've heard that in regard to like, look at Muslim societies, we don't, they're very large families, is, even those, I'm curious, any word on, is the Muslim world even starting to take?
As the Muslim world gets westernized and the women get educated, with education comes knowledge of and use of birth control. And I suspect we will see much the same thing happening also in that world. Now, how that's going to affect marriage and so forth, I don't know. This may explain some of the just what appears to us to be this irrational violence against Western culture. There actually may be some reason behind it, because they perceive something of the destruction of the home in Western society. That's speculation on my part, but it might be something to think about.
Actually, the main writer behind a lot of the jihadis and ISIS spent some time in San Francisco and has actually some pretty honest critiques of the Western world.
Okay.
Yeah, that's very much a part of we call it radical, but I would call it all Islam. Is the marital situation is the reason. There are within ISIS there are groups of women who are sent out to go and suppress other women who they believe are too westernized and are not holding up their job as Muslim women, and they have the authority to kill them if they feel it's necessary.
So we find ourselves in the midst of, what, foes on every hand, right? I mean, yeah, where are our friends? So anyway, just that, so, you know, what are we trying to accomplish? I think one of the terms you can use is that we really want to maritalize our children. We want to prepare them for, I know that not all of them are going to marry, but they need to be prepared for marriage. And with marriage, all the life, the Christian life that goes with it. You know, a Christian home, you know, bearing children, you know, birth rates are dropping all over the world. We've got this incredible world crisis that is undoubtedly coming as we have an aging population with no children to take care of them. If that doesn't scare people, I don't know what will. What violence and so forth will come out of that, what horrible atrocities and crimes will be committed in the name of these things. As Christians, just setting all those things aside, really, it's our task in terms of vocation to maritalize our children, to bring them up for marriage and family and home life, and with that, the life of the church. You will recognize that one of the crises that we have in our Lutheran schools is that there aren't enough children, period. People aren't having enough children.
I think the tide is changing, however, among some of our Lutheran population, mainly homeschoolers, but Lutheran pastors waking up to the fact that we need to be having more children.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, very much so. All right. So there's another term, a synonym of culture that I want to use here, and that's, or that I want to refer to here, and that is the term socialize and socialization. I can see you all cringe as I use it. So a soki, an associate or companion. And by the way, my favorite derivative of this word is soccer.
Great sport.
Association football. Soccer. So, all right. Socialization. This is the term that has been appealed to by our public education system, by parents who place the highest value on this aspect of their children's education. It was, and I believe it still is, the highest priority of most parents that their children be well socialized. Am I right? okay? When you watch what decisions what actually drives their decisions as to what they do with their children in terms of education and raising them, I think for most of them, in the end, they just want them well socialized. And all the financial and all the lots of other things, jobs, college, is ultimately related to this question of socialization. I just think that really drives parents. Now, I'll have to say, this choice of priorities used to irritate me, as you can imagine. I wanted to educate their children. They wanted to socialize them. Okay? In fact, I think I finally realized that they were exactly right. Socialization of our children is, in fact, the highest priority of education. So, let me help you think about this. Follow me for a minute here. The synonym of socialization is enculturation. We're back to your Colum word, enculturation. Here's a good working definition of this term, straight out of Wikipedia. My apologies. It's part of the enculturation. Enculturation is the process by which a person learns the requirements of the culture by which he or he is surrounded and acquires values and behaviors that are appropriate or necessary in that culture. As a part of this process, the influences which limit, direct, or shape the individual, the child in this case, whether deliberately or not, include parents, other adults, and peers. If successful, enculturation results in competence in the language, values, and rituals of the culture. Let me read that part again. If successful, enculturation results in competence in the language, values, and rituals of the culture. The process of enculturation is related to socialization. In some academic fields, socialization refers to the deliberate shaping of the individual. In others, the word may be used to cover both the deliberate and informal enculturation. All right, so enculturation, the socializing, or if you will, civilizing of a person, is the learning and adopting of a culture which takes place both deliberately and informally, or we might even say accidentally. Our children will be enculturated by someone with some culture. That's a given. They will have a culture of some sort. Okay? So, which means that they will acquire the values and behaviors that are appropriate to that culture. Their competence in that culture will be seen in its language, values, and rituals. Language, of course, here refers to words. The ability to use them, the ideas they embody, the knowledge they impart, the rationale that undergirds, in fact, the values and rituals. So that's language. Competence in language. Competence in values. Values includes the judgments of what is true or false, good or evil, beautiful or ugly. It incorporates theology, philosophy, ethics, and morality, law, the entire outlook of man upon such institutions as home, church, government, vocation, marriage, and the like. Values. Rituals, by the way, ritual is not a bad word. Do we all know this? Okay.
Depends on the ritual, I suppose.
I would refer you to, it does depend on the ritual. We are all ritual creatures. Okay. I would refer you to John Kleinig's essay, you can find it on the internet, Witting or Unwitting Ritualists. It's also referred to, if you have access to the Concordia commentary, those big blue commentaries that have come out. His commentary on Leviticus has an excellent discussion there, and he references that article there. We have, I don't have time to talk about ritual, but I would love to with you. Rituals, we're all ritual creatures, and so etiquette, good etiquette is ritual. Good liturgy, bad liturgy is ritual. Ritual is important. Just ask any pastor who's tangled with the mother of the bride. Right?
Yeah, they're tough sometimes.
Yeah, or the bride herself, right? Now, ritual is important. So, rituals refer to the culturally adopted actions, words, and order that govern our interactions and which embody and enact the institutions we value. So, rituals include etiquette, marriage customs, habits of the home, and, of course, the liturgical life of the church. That all of that falls into ritual. So, enculturation has to do with producing competence in the use of rituals. Okay? Enculturation, with that in mind, is our most important task. We are commanded by God, upon the pain of losing eternal life, to enculturate our children. That's Luther in the Large Catechism, Fourth Commandment. For Lutherans faithful to this public confession, this enculturation must take place in those three primary areas: the home, the church, and then also in the school. That, of course, is assuming a classical Lutheran school. The content of this culture is, first of all, Christianity and all the fullness of our doctrinal and liturgical and communal life. This culture also includes the best of Western civilization, from Greeks and Romans, the early Middle Ages, early church through the Middle Ages, the Renaissance, the Reformation, through the many defeats and triumphs of our own age. The best of our American culture has historically been drawn from the great cultural traditions of the Christian West. You can see Christian Kopp's book on that particular subject. Neville knows Latin. According to our definition, enculturation should result in competence in those three cultural things: competence in the language, values, and rituals of the culture. Let me go through that again. Our language is the Bible, and our Lutheran confessions, first of all, and then Western culture. Language itself, English, of course, but also Latin. This is why we talk about Latin. The trivium, grammar, logic, and rhetoric, and the four mathematical arts that follow: arithmetic, geometry, astronomy, music. Our history and literature are especially important vehicles for conveying and teaching and embodying our common language. Our values are, first of all, our Christian doctrinal convictions: faith, traditional morality, absolute truth, personal self-discipline, work ethic, all these things that we struggle with. In the political realm, constitutional democratic republicanism, or you can consider what our values are within the domestic realm, and so forth. And beneath all of these, a worldview, a map, if you will, in which all of these values are incorporated and united around its Christological center. For us, Christ is always at the heart and center and provides the foundation for all of these. And then third, there are the rituals that are passed on in the process of enculturation, everything from our liturgical heritage to the habits and customs of the home, the daily rituals and practices of the school, classroom, and so on. Those of you, well, all of you, teachers, administrators, you give thought to the ritual of your school, and you do well to do so. Those things are important. It doesn't mean they have to be identical in every classical Lutheran school, but all rituals have meaning. They all have purpose. They all, let me restate that, they all do something. Every ritual does something. Okay? Think about this, of course, is an easy example. Think about the ritual of marriage. The ritual of marriage does something. Therefore, what God has joined together, right? Let not man separate. Okay? That's what rituals do. That's how they function. They do things. They have a function to them. You have to think about those things. So the question of socialization or enculturation, or if you will, civilization or maritalization, so we'll throw some more words in for you here. It's an important way of looking at our task. As a pastor, I have grieved deeply as I've watched the vast majority of my confirmation students grow up and observe that they've been enculturated right out of the church, and oftentimes out of the Christian faith itself. I didn't teach them this foreign and hostile culture. Who did? And how did they do it? Right? And this question must be asked of our classical Lutheran schools as we strive toward high standards of excellence. What have we gained if we've merely trained them to be smart, rich, and successful unbelievers? What have we accomplished in the end if they reject our language and values and rituals? If they adopt a language, values, and rituals which are opposed to and destructive of our own? I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but these are the things that we think about, and these are the appeals that we make to our congregations and the parents in our school and so forth. Okay,
Could you repeat that about what are we doing? If we're just making them, what was your,
Oh.
please, slowly.
Yes, no.
Want to bring this up at our school board?
Smart, rich,
What are we doing
Right.
to be smart, rich, successful, and
Exactly right. You can restate that in your own words, but, yeah, the failure is complete if they don't continue in the faith. All right, so I'll just give you an outline of the things that I would have talked about with you in what follows. Focusing on the teacher, I think what I'll do is give you some Bible passages that I like to focus on. The first task, or the first most important thing, and this really begins at the beginning of this presentation, but I saved it till here because I wanted to focus it on the task of teaching or the school, and that is, what's the mandate? You know how Luther's small catechism works. What is baptism? Baptism is not just plain water, but it's water included in God's command and combined with God's word. What's the next question?
Which is
Who should be baptized?
Where is this written?
I knew that.
Where is this written?
I guess we got
You guys are all getting ahead of me. Don't skip this one. He does the same thing in the Lord's Supper, by the way. He does the same thing in the Office of the Keys. Where is this written? So we've been talking about what is it, what is classical education. The where is it written part is critically important. In the end, we have nothing to say about what we're doing if we don't have a mandate for it, a divine mandate for it. All right? So I would propose to you that this begins in Genesis chapters 1 and 2. We don't have time to tease all of this out, but the creation of man is male and female, created for community, for marriage, for childbearing, for raising of children, for home, for society, for government, for culture, for... You see how the four expands into all of our life together? Okay, the mandate for catechizing your children, for raising them in the Christian faith is found right there already in Genesis 1 and 2. You don't have to go somewhere else to find the starting point. It starts right there with the creation of man himself. Then that mandate is repeated very explicitly in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9, so please look that up. Has the Old Testament creed, the Shema in it, and then you shall teach these things diligently to your children, etc. You know that passage. Repeated again by way of song in Psalm 78, verses 5 through 8. Psalm 78 is a magnificent psalm. That's a wonderful psalm. Great. Well, they're all wonderful. All right. So in the New Testament, the mandate is found very explicitly in Matthew chapter 28. Baptize them, teach them. Okay, right there. You notice, by the way, baptism and teaching are paired together. They belong together. They are. How do I say this? They're two sides of the same coin in many ways. Many ways. In fact, I would propose to you that if you really want to, in the New Testament, your mandate probably should be rooted back in the baptism of Jesus himself. Okay, back into the baptism. Luther and those early Lutherans spent a lot of time reflecting upon the baptism of our Lord. I don't think we've spent near enough time in latter Lutheranism reflecting on that particular gospel account. I think we should do more. I'd love to speak more about that. But and you'll notice that the baptism of our Lord has been paired very deliberately and verbally with the transfiguration. Humanity revealed in the glory of God, God's, how do I say this? The glory of God revealed in the humanity of the man Christ Jesus, and it is at that point that the Father says, "Hear him." Now, this is my beloved Son, with whom I am well pleased. Hear him. Our whole pedagogical task, I think, is rooted in the baptism of our Lord, and more fully with those words in the Transfiguration. God's command to us to hear all that Jesus says and does, to be well pleased with Him as the Father is well pleased with Him, to receive Him as the Father's chosen one, and so forth. So baptism and our task so tightly bound up with our Lord and His mission for us. Wow, there are more passages. The marriage accounts, of course, in Matthew 19. Very important. You know, of course, the passage from Ephesians chapter 6, 5 and 6, marriages with that. And 2 Timothy chapter 3, the end of the chapter there, very great. I think I'm going to have to stop there because my time is up. Had we had time, we would spend a little more time reflecting on grammar and logic and rhetoric. You can find discussions of those, but if look at them in the context of some of the things that we've discussed, and I think it'll maybe fill out for you the fact that these are not sort of random processes that somebody came up with because they happen to be pragmatically effective, but rather they are simply descriptions of who we are and how we were designed and made, and in fact they fit with sort of the reality of all things that God has created and given to us, and they help you with that. Okay, thank you all for your very kind attention.